Hey there everybody, ℏ𝔢𝔞𝔯𝔢𝔯 here, welcome back to the channel. Last video lecture, we were talking about how to create an exciting world. We were talking about the different nuances that go into what makes a world appealing and why. We were talking about mood, inspiration, aesthetic, atmosphere. We were talking about the different facets and the different ideas that go into creating a world somebody might want to spectate, somebody might want to live in, somebody might want to be in, and how to use all these different techniques in order to go and, I'll use the words, view, occupy, or even just be a part of a journey and a story in this world. But there is a lot more that we have to cover, not just that. Those were only the building blocks, and it was really the foundation as to creating an appealing world and getting people enticed. What we created was the visa. We created the brochure. But now we actually have to start setting up the world so that when people go through the checkpoint and they go through immigration, they can actually begin to start seeing the different settings of your world. You don't want your world to be static, regardless if you're making a story about high schoolers or kids in junior high, or maybe you have a story about the office. There's more to the world than just the office, and I'll explain why. So when you write a world, regardless of the setting, it doesn't typically matter what type of world it is. It could be in high school, junior high, it could be about the office. But what a lot of writers do is they know that because they limited themselves to such a small area, and they limited themselves to really just one locale or one location, what they did was they made sure to make the office or make the high school or make the junior high or make the neighborhood. If you look at Stranger Things, that's what they did. They made sure to encapsulate not just the neighborhood, but the entire town. The more broader you can make your worlds and the more adventurous you can create it to be, the more willing somebody is going to like your world. So now we have to figure out actually how to put that into practice. We saw in last video lecture that we describe things in a very specific manner, that we have a lot of description. We talk about everything from the wildlife and the fauna to the type of architecture to the color palette of the world, from the sky to the grass to the castles to the forests to whatever. And now we actually have to start building upon that. This is where a lot of your writing is going to take some bulk, at least in the course of developing your world. This is what you see writers do up front. So now we're starting to see kind of the back end visuals and kind of the back end tactics and back end. I don't want to use the word tactics because that has a negative connotation, and I don't want to use the word back end engineering because then that makes it sound like we're coding or something. I guess really back end technique is probably the best word to use, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So first and foremost, have the things in place. You have the building blocks ready. You have the visa, you have the brochure. Okay, well now let's actually go into the world. So first and foremost, what makes a great story and why, right? What makes a great story from a good one? You have plenty of stories out here. You have everything from John Steinbeck to Orson Welles to J.K. Rowling, Tom Clancy, C.J. Box. You have Mike Lupica. You have tons of all these different authors. But there's great stories, and then there's good. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes a good story is just that, a good story. There are tons of authors that write good stories, but there are authors that write great ones, and that's what we want to accomplish. You can have a good story. A good story isn't necessarily bad. There are plenty of video games that have a good story. Would I go back and replay them? Maybe. But there's a difference between Cyberpunk 2077 story, which I think is a good story. I don't particularly care for it all that often. But if I were to play Grand Theft Auto 4, for example, now that is a great story. As Tony the Tiger would say, they're great! So, that being said, what makes a great story from a good one? Well, there's a few things we have to consider. The best type of practice is we want to make the world not just as appealing as possible in its foundation so that we can lure people into the world, or lure people in. I guess it's pronunciation. It's not just a matter of handing out the brochure and the visa. It's about really giving somebody the passport. It's about really allowing somebody to come in, and there's many different ways we can do that. The best way to do it in best practice is you have to ask yourself basic yet very detailed questions as if you were a foreigner coming to this world. Again, in the previous lecture, I wrote that your world should be written as if it has always existed, and that there could never be a reality where this world did not exist. And a lot of writers, when they're writing like crime fiction, for example, they'll actually go and mimic a lot of the things that have happened in the real world and copy it into their fictional universe. A great example is Criminal Minds. I don't know if anyone's seen that show, but on USA, Netflix, or old USA, on USA Network, on, I think it might have been on CBS at one point. So you had CBS, but I always watched it on USA, and on Netflix, Amazon Prime, wherever you decide to watch your TV. So in the creating of Criminal Minds, what they did was they actually brought in real FBI agents who hunted down real actual serial killers, murderers, rapists, carjackers, car thieves, kidnappers, pedophiles, okay? Real, actual dangerous people. And they actually went over the case in a PowerPoint presentation, ironic considering what I'm doing here. And they actually sat the cast down in a boardroom similar to how it would be in the FBI. They lowered the lights, if not turned them off completely. You can go watch like the backstage documentaries about the show after it aired. You can go look at those and you'll see that they were reviewing real cases with real FBI agents, or ones who were now ex-FBI because they retired, or post-FBI. But they would go over that in detail, and they would explain like the process in which the FBI went to go catch them. These are the lengths that you have to take as a writer in order to truly make your world feel as though this world has always existed, and there could never be a point where someone says, wait, does this actually not exist? Hold up, because this doesn't work. If you're writing a fantasy novel, you get a lot of leeway with that because up front the audience understands it's a fantasy novel, etc. But if you write a fantasy novel like Harry Potter, for example, or if you write a spy thriller like Splinter Cell, or if you write a novel like Joe Pickett or Longmire, or if you write a book that takes place in the real world that has real world elements and has real world information with things that you have seen, have read, have watched, have listened to, know about, have learned of, then that makes your world a lot more believable, and again, it makes your world a lot more realistic. So when we look at Longmire, for example, when Longmire was written, not just the show, but it was a book before it became a Netflix show. Well, I believe it was also on Amazon Prime now. So when Longmire was written actually in the company of actual, like, Wyoming, Montana, like the whole Midwestern Far West, out in the middle of what they call pancake land, or big country. You can't see it, I'm doing air quotes. So think of, like, Red Dead Redemption when you're out in the middle of the Heartlands, or think of Red Dead Redemption when you're out in the middle of the Great Plains, or think of any, like, cowboy movie that you have seen. So the book Longmire was written in the company of the people who actually lived in those territories, who lived in those regions, who lived in that area, and asked them a bunch of questions. Oops, sorry, hit my mic. Asked them a bunch of questions of what's it like? What happens when things get dicey? What's the shootouts like? What's the law like out here? In fact, if we actually look at, if I can remember the name, I can see the image in my mind. It was a TV show about a guy who. It was a TV show about a guy. I forget the name of the show. It escapes me, but it was a TV show about a guy who basically would go and he would hunt down missing people. And what they did is they actually went to and I'm probably gonna butcher this, but it's essentially along the lines of like the United States National like Amber Alert Center for missing children, and the writer for the show went to that federal building or whatever for missing kids, and actually sat down with somebody who tracked down missing children who ran away from home, had teen pregnancies, didn't get along with the parents, wanted to, hitchhike and got kidnapped, etc. So I'm not saying you have to go out and interview people, but you should if you want to add a lot of like real world realism into the world on top of your fiction. So a good example is I'm writing a book. I'm writing a few, but the one I'm currently focusing on is Hayden Clark and America's Book of Secrets, and it is essentially the American Harry Potter, and it's set. It has a colonial theme essentially. It's modern day, but the world of this magical place is very Harry Potter in nature. And even though the technology and the housing and the architecture and everything is all medieval, colonial with all the weapons and whatnot, I'm still going to add like spells and witches and warlocks and gargoyles and and all these other fantasy monsters. But at the same time, I'm really doing in-depth research about the period and about the time frame. So you have to really think about, it doesn't matter if your world's science fiction, go look at what NASA, for example, has posted on the internet and copy some of the things from there. If you look at, and I hate to bring this game up, Starfield. If you look at Starfield, so they had a theme called NASA Punk, and essentially it's old NASA from like the 1970s through like the 80s, and it's very grungy and very technical in the sense of everything is basically a giant PC tower and a machine, and everything looks very not just grungy and technical, but everything feels very like almost cyberpunky, and they went to that extent because that's what they wanted to capture the world as. That being said, you have to kind of do the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're telling a historical story, a historical fiction fantasy like Hayden Clark and America's Book of Secrets. It doesn't matter if you're writing the next Harry Potter and everything is fantasy. You're writing science fiction, post-apocalyptic survival. It doesn't particularly matter. You have to take inspiration from things in order to make it feel a lot more, and I want to be careful about the words I say here, to make it a lot more not just connective between the reader or the audience and the story, but also, again, to reinforce that idea of this world has always existed, especially if it's supposed to take place somewhere in the real world. But even if it doesn't, like if you look at The Witcher is heavily medieval, and everything about it is medieval, but there's tons of monsters in there and whatnot, tons of creatures, and they all have their own bestiaries and whatnot. So you have to ask yourself very basic but detailed questions as if you were a foreigner coming to the world. How does this world impact the character or characters? Or, first and foremost, how does it impact the characters, right? How does it, or character, depending on your cast, if you have one person or several. So you have to figure out, how does it do that? But also, does that world impact the character or characters? Or do the characters impact the world? A lot of the time in video game writing, it's going to be the latter, that the characters impact the world, of course, because you're on a journey and you're on a narrative. However, if you look at games like Final Fantasy 15, Kingdom Hearts, if you look at games like Cyberpunk, Grand Theft Auto 4, if you look at the Mafia games, when you play those games and you like blow up a building, or Red Dead Redemption 2 is another good one, Red Dead Redemption 2. If you play a lot of these games that are more RPG in nature, you can do things to the world and the world will react, but also at the same time, the world will do things and the player or the character and characters will react. But it's really up to you. You can do both. You can make the scales go back and forth. I'm a personal proponent of that one. I believe I'm using that word correctly. So I'm pretty sure proponent, it means supporter. I don't think it means aggregator and or someone who defines that, defies it. But anyways, I am a supporter of the scales going back and forth and kind of like a seesaw, up, down, and having the world impact the character impact the world, because you have a lot more freedom to just write and write and write and just keep going, and you have so much, and you're always on the edge of your seat going, what can happen next, excuse me. But at the same time, you can, in fact, have the world constantly impact the character. There's a game called, I don't want to say This War of Mine. That might be what it's called. Or it's called War of Hearts or something like that. Essentially, I believe it's called This War of Mine, and you're a medic in World War I believe. And you don't really do anything. You just kind of see how the war has affected everybody. If you play Fable 3 is kind of along the same lines as that. So, yes, you can change your perception and how people treat you and how people like you, very much like Red Dead Redemption 2's honor system, or Red Dead Redemption's honor system. But really, it's the world impacting the character, the prince or the princess. So, you have to kind of choose, is it going to be both parties go back and forth, or is it going to be one or the other, meaning the character always impacts the world, or the world always impacts the character? In Fable 3, it was always the world impacts the character. In This War of Mine, again, I believe that's what the game's called, is the world impacts the character. But if you look at a lot of RPGs like Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, Cyberpunk, Yakuza, etc., these games, it can either be both at the same time, or the character will impact the world. So then you have to ask, why does the world exist? How did it come to be? Did a god go and create it? Was it just a mystery? Has the land always been there and no one really knows why? Did an asteroid come down, or a rain of asteroids come down and pummel and beat the Earth, or whatever you decide to call your Earth-like realm or your world? And from the impact and from the shattering and from the craters and everything else, the world began to just naturally take shape? Is there a region? What is the cuisine? Who is who in the world? There's social status, right? Or what do they represent in that world? What does your world have to deal with that other worlds don't? So, for example, in Emerald Gardens, there's many things that other worlds don't have to deal with. So, if you're writing a world where, and I'll use my previous example from the last lecture, if you're writing a world in which the world constantly snows, you have to talk about why that world has to deal with it and other worlds do not. So, a good example would be, maybe there's one world where it's always a drought. There's dry grass everywhere. Fires happen daily, if not hourly or quarter hourly, every 15 minutes, every 25 minutes, every 15 minutes, every half hour, every 45 minutes, however you want to do it. There's no water, or there's very little, etc. Perhaps one piece of the world it always snows, another piece of the world it's always dry and hot, another piece of the world it's always raining, and people have to constantly keep building up and up and up and up, or wider and wider, to get away from the rising water that keeps flooding the city or the world or whatever. Excuse me. Good old apple cider. So, that being said, you have to go and find out what this world has to deal with that others don't. That will be extremely impactful when you decide to actually start having your world become a living, breathing place for your characters to run around in. So, have there been any conflicts in this world? How many conflicts has there been? Is the world a complete utopia? Or is there constant war over and over and over? In Dragon Quest Builders 2, and I'm gonna be a man about it. I'll be a man about it, and I'll say it. I completely stole this idea from them, Square Enix. But of course, I look up to them. They're my role model, so I could I could steal from them. So they have a world in Dragon Quest Builders 2. It's a continent where it is always at war. It has never not been at war. It will continuously be at war with the darkness and the undead. It will constantly be at war with the monsters. Literal purpose of human reproduction is rather a female is born to give birth to men who will then train to go out and fight and rather survive for the rest of their life and have kids and then go out to war and then survive, have more kids, go out to war, rather die or come back because they're too old, but by that time their kids went out and fought. So it's just constantly this never-ending war. The I believe it's called like the land where war, the land. It's something, oh jeez, it's been forever, and I should know this too, being a Square Enix fanboy, but essentially it's like the world where there's endless war, like the world of endless lore, the land of endless war, or the war, or like the endless warlands, or something like that. I should probably Google, but that's not the point. The point is there any conflicts in your world? Is there anything that's happened? Is there war? Is there famine? Is there disease, right? Is there constant besieges? Is there elemental conflict? Like, again, it always snows, it always rains, it's always snowing, it always rains, it always snows, it always hails, it's always dry, or it always rains, or maybe like it's always daytime or it's always nighttime. So, although if it's a fishing world, that actually might be pretty good because the best time to fish is at night, but regardless. So, have there been any conflicts? And if so, how many? And what affects that? In my world, Emerald Gardens, I talk about all the different wars that have happened and how dynasties have risen and fallen and adapted, and how these different types of clans eventually became rulers, and who got what landmass and why, and what were the different politics in between everything. I made sure to write it down to the very foundations of the current dynasty. Of course, you don't have to do that. I'm a bit of a psycho, so I'm kidding. I'm just really passionate about creative writing. And so you want to be able to do that too, right? You want to be able to talk about what those conflicts have been and when they started, how they started, why they start, etc. But again, you don't have to. It's just based on your world. So are there any animalia, or what is the animalia, right? What are the different types of animals? Why do certain plants thrive while others do not? What are the resources and why is it important? What makes the world forgiving and unforgiving, right? Like, what's the punishments of the world, and then what are the graces of the world? So, like, if you're fighting, for example, in Emerald Gardens, if you go out into the world, there's monsters, right? And those monsters have no problem killing you. Same thing with all these different armies, and if one army sees another army, they're going to go at it in the middle of wherever. It could be a battlefield, it could be in the middle of the ocean, it could be just outside a kingdom. So, I mean, that's kind of like the punishments, right? You're never really safe outside your kingdom because everything's gone to hell. But there's also a lot of graciousness too, because when you're inside these kingdoms, or when you're in allied kingdom territory, or when you're with people who can hold their own, there's a lot more, I'll use the words, there's a lot more like survival rate. And also, that not everybody in the world is like super unforgiving and very like cutthroat. There are a lot of people who are sympathetic towards Warwick, who's the main character, and there's also a lot of good people as well. It's just you live in a time of conflict. So that, that really goes to show you, and I want to be particular in my words here, because when you say that you have to have constant conflict, or when you have a world that's extremely punishing, like in Hayden Clark in American Book of Secrets, so if you go out into like the forest, for example, or you go out into like the woods, you'll never know which you'll come across, and those monsters or beasts or whatever, they will kill you because to them you are prey. But while that is a punishment, it could also be like a saving grace as well, because you could be saved by another animal, for example. So when I talk about what are the punishments of a world and what's forgiving, you have to think about it kind of like Elden Ring, or think about it like Elder Scrolls, or think about it like Cyberpunk, where there's a lot of hostility around you, and there's lots of things that can happen to you. But at the same time, you're not always under threat. It's just threat could be around any corner. But what are the balances there? And that's what you have to really hone in on, especially because people want to see conflict. A lot of people say, oh, I'm not about the drama. Yeah, you're about the drama. Like, let's be honest. If people weren't about the drama, reality TV would not be a multi-billion-dollar industry. Everybody's about the drama. Everybody's about the conflict. Everybody is about the epic storylines. Because, as Helveticus says in his book, the Book of Misfortune, written by Helveticus, he says, the human mind cannot comprehend the mediocrity of decent life. Therefore, the individual is bored, and the human mind cannot comprehend or stay in the stasis of boredom. Therefore, they will make the mundane exciting, because people just can't handle something being average or boring, so people will always do something in order to create excitement. But that's not the point. The point is, if you're going to have conflict in your world, or if you're going to have punishments in your world, make sure to balance them with saving graces, or explain what those are and why. So, can the world evolve? Can the world evolve? I recommend that it should. Because this gives you a lot. Okay, I'll say it like this. This way it's less confusing. If you make your world with the ability to constantly evolve as the story goes on, you give yourself as the writer more opportunity to create more stories. You intrigue the audience to learn more. As the world evolves, you are allowed to get deeper and deeper into your world. I recommend it because that allows you to constantly stay within the story. It doesn't allow you to leave. And that's what you want. There's lots of video games where they don't do that. Mafia 2 is a culprit of that. Cyberpunk is a culprit of that. Fallout, I was going to say the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, Fallout 4 is a culprit of that. And even though those games are extremely deep in terms of storytelling and RPG and world mechanic, and in Mafia 2, during a high-speed chase, you can actually crash through a shopping center, a clothes store. And when you're in the middle of you're leaning out the window of your 1955 Chevy Bel Air, and you're just ripping fire on a Tommy gun, from outside the window while these guys are chasing you, you crash through a clothing store. And these worlds, there's depth to them. You look at GTA 4, you could practically go almost anywhere. Same thing with Saints Row. There's so many enterable buildings, at Saints Row 2 especially. However, the world doesn't change after the fact. Saints Row does not change after the fact. Fallout 4 does not change after the fact. Mafia 2 does not change after the fact. But when you look at games like Kingdom Hearts, for example, the worlds do change after Sora, Donald, Goofy, Riku, Kairi, Xemnas, Xehanort, whoever, they go and do something, the world changes, right? You want to be able to have your worlds constantly evolve, because then that allows for greater diversity when you tell your story. Same thing if you're making a video game. You want your actions of the past to inflict possibility for more adventure in your sequels. So I recommend it, but you don't have to. There are worlds that are completely static. Fallout 4 is a very static world. No matter how much of the RPG elements you do, nothing really changes except if your rewards are rather bonus or if they're underserved. So for example, you may complete a certain quest in a type of way, but depending on if you complete that quest or not in whatever way you choose, what happens is it may or may not give you higher yielding rewards, or you may or may not get an achievement or a trophy or something like that. The world stays static. No matter how many times you clear out, I'm just going to pick a random location off the map. No matter how many times you clear out Boston Common or like Boston Central or Cambridge Subway, no matter how many times you clear it out, it's always going to reset in terms of enemies. So you could clear out like one dungeon, because that's what they are. Like Bethesda games are, like the caves in Skyrim are dungeons, the buildings in Fallout are dungeons. So because their whole thing is tabletop RPG, so it's all dungeons. But you have to realize that no matter how many times you do that, you're still going to ultimately, the game is going to stay the same. Nothing really changes per se. I mean, even if you took out the Brotherhood of Steel, even if you decide to do that, I mean, you're still going to find the Brotherhood of Steel patrolling the Commonwealth. I mean, even if you decide to blow up the Institute, yeah, there's a giant crater, but I mean, that's really it. The world doesn't really change. I mean, yeah, there's reactions, etc. I mean, when you go to Diamond City and the Brotherhood of Steel is occupying Diamond City, I mean, you can still do everything. You don't see them expanding Diamond City. You don't see a military base pop up somewhere. You don't see that the area is a lot less hostile than what it was before. It's just now you have some extra backup with you because the Brotherhood of Steel is there. So if you're going to have a static world, like a neighborhood, and the entire story takes place in the neighborhood, you have to choose if this is going to be static instead of constantly evolving and adding for more direction of where your story could go, then you want to really focus and really niche down on that neighborhood. Because if it's static and there's no room for change and things happen, like somebody got in a car crash or whatever, you can't go to the hospital because that's outside your neighborhood, right? Maybe you could have a street blocked off, but again, you're limiting yourself to that neighborhood. So if you have a static world, and again, that's not bad. I mean, if you look at the Mafia games are a static world. I mean, if you look at some of the Yakuza games are static worlds because the districts are so small because you're getting closer and closer to the end of the franchise. But that being said, you really have to niche down on what makes that neighborhood, that district, that high school, that junior high, that castle, that wherever it's just one location. Or if your world is static, no matter like what you do, like if you kill off a city official, or if you blow up a skyscraper, or if you like raid a castle, or if you decide to take down a mountain for whatever reason, then even if nothing really like changes, you still have to make that exciting to some extent. And the way you would do that is you would talk about the progression of the world, because there's a difference between like evolution of a world and progression. So evolution of a world would be like the world evolves as time goes on. So like buildings are built, new like regimes happen, right? There's maybe like the city gets a new district, etc. But a static world or worlds that have progression would be more like what happens as time goes on in that small area, in that small subset. I'm sorry if you can hear that. That's my cat. So, gotta see if I can get him over here so he won't meow as much. Oh my god, he's running like a NASCAR. Hey, buddy. So, you really want to find what makes your world appealing, and if you're going to have a world that does not change no matter what happens, then you have to really niche down on that world and make it exciting. So if your story takes place in a house, and it's just that one house, like Clue is a static, like if you look at the story of Clue, murder mystery, everyone's locked in a mansion, it's just that one mansion, etc. That it's a static world. Nothing changes, right? If you look at the book of Room doesn't change. The main character, she stays in her room. That's it. It's just room. So, I mean, they may go out every now and again, but like even then, it's about if you make it static where nothing really changes, nothing big happens, and big things can happen. Like if you're having a murder mystery, for example, a clue could be revealed that it's a really big clue, or someone got caught in the act or something. Okay, sure. But the fact of the matter is, if a static is the world does not change, things just happen in it. A world that evolves has things that happen in it, and the world evolves even as those things happen. So that's something you have to figure out. So, is there death? And if so, how is it handled? So, in my work, the Moonlight Chronicles, there's about 3 or 4 different kinds of death. The first type is the mortal death. So you die, and that is it. You die. It's game over. You know that was your chapter in history. Okay, and then for those who have the celestial marking on their body, or as they call it, the ℭ𝔂𝔢𝔞𝔯𝔢𝔠, and if they don't call it the ℭ𝔂𝔢𝔢𝔢𝔠, they'll call it the ℭ𝔂𝔢𝔁 like gift, or like they'll say like a Nova's rash, or they'll say like not a Nova's rash, excuse me, a star rash, for example, or star burn. They call it a few different things, but it's depending on where you are within the region of ℏ, which is the world of the Moonlight Chronicles. But anyways, so if you have one of those, that allows you to like essentially have like all these different, like, think JRPG like abilities. You know, you're going at like 1,000,000 miles a minute. There's like blue flashes or red flashes everywhere. You know, basic giant anime fight, right? So if you die, what happens is you can do one of two things. Either you my Discord. So you either go to one of 3 places. You rather go to the Palace of Heavens, or excuse me, the Palace of Heavens, and you essentially become a god, right? Or you go to what's known as the white space, or also known as the in-between, which essentially is purgatory, and you're rather trapped there for life, or you have to essentially resolve something within yourself, and the white space, the world of in-between, will choose if you decide to go upstairs or downstairs, right? Or if you go back to the living, which is what happened to Cyrus Silvermane. When he sacrificed himself, he went to the white space. He went to the world of in-between. And the world of in-between was like, well, you know, we're not sure about you yet, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to see if you can find your way out, and then once you find your way out, then if you can stay alive, then there you go. And that's what happened to him. Of course, he is still dead. He just now has like ghost powers. But then, of course, there's the last, where if you have the mark of the ℭ𝔂𝔢𝔞𝔯𝔢𝔢 on you, then you go to hell, or whatever the hell region, right? The underworld. And then you're there. So, and of course theoretically speaking, I don't want to get into the technicals, but theoretically speaking, all the afterlife realms, whether it's the white space, whether it's the Palace of the Stars, or the Palace of the Celeste, regardless if it's the underworld, technically speaking, you can actually come back into the mortal world. But primarily, that's not what happens. But you can, is what I'm saying. I'm trying to think of, in Emerald Gardens, death is one of rather, like, I think 2 things. Rather, you're dead and you're done, or you're dead and I believe you can be resurrected. But it has to be done in a particular order, in a particular manner, and there's a ritual, etc. Think like Dragon Ball, where you have to get like all the Dragon Balls so you can resurrect somebody. But of course, instead of Dragon Balls, it's, a different thing, but I'm just trying to give you the idea. So, is there death in this world, and does it evolve? And is there death in this world? How is it handled? Does it evolve over time? Like, the more that somebody is dead, the harder it is for them to come back to the land of the living. Things like that. Think Jonah Hex. If you know who Jonah Hex is, think Jonah Hex. So he says, the dead like dirt, the dirt like dead, ain't nothing to it but that. Simple. And so when he pours dirt on dead people, he can talk to them. And so that goes to show that there's kind of a veil, and I hate to use that word because ChatGPT, like, dude, oh my god, like ChatGPT, oh my god, that is the smut word for ChatGPT right there, because ChatGPT abuses the word veil. But it's true. It shows that there is a veil between the mortal world and the afterlife. So, is there death in your world? How is it handled? Does it evolve over time? Does it stay static? If someone gets shot in the face, are they done, or do they go somewhere? And if so, do they have options? Do they not have options? Maybe there is no death in your world, and maybe that's a conflict. Maybe somebody was achieving immortality, they got it, and instead of becoming a god themselves, they went and gave it to everybody on the realm, and gave it to everybody on the earth or the planet or wherever your world takes place. And now it's like, well, we're immortal, and we have kids. Our kids are now immortal, if that's the way it works. Or maybe they have to get their immortalage through, like, anointment, kind of like how the Catholics in church, they baptize you. So maybe you have to go through some sort of baptism and you become immortal. You know, maybe that's a conflict. And then you could tell a really interesting story there about, you know, even though they're immortal, if there's a way to break that immortality around somebody and you kill them, then, you know, is that for the good of the people in your population? Does that solve a problem? I mean, if you look at Soylent Green said the exact same thing. Soylent Green, you've probably seen the meme, maybe not, but if not, now you can look it up. Soylent Green is people! So Soylent Green essentially is in a post-apocalyptic world. There were these basically like astroturfed grass chunks of a square, and they were food rations that people could eat. But turns out it was actually processed dead people. That's what it was. When people were dying, the government would take them and they would put them in a chair, and then what they would do is they would quickly euthanize them, and as they were dying in Soylent Green, they would show them images of how beautiful Earth is. You know, they would show them pictures like of animals and insects like butterflies and ladybugs, and they would show them flowers and cats and dogs and happy families and everything, so that they die happily and die peacefully. And have a good image before they die, and then they get processed into edible food, and then they're shipped out to the people. So, but then at the end of the movie, when it's figured out, I believe it's at the end of the movie when it's figured out, they say, Soylent Green is people! So, and everybody flips out. But, you know, how is death handled? You have to figure that out, because that's going to be a question that does come up for the audience. You may not think it, but the audience will ask you, what happens if somebody dies, or can they die? Now, if you write a story where nobody dies, no one's going to think about it. But if you have someone who's really old and maybe really nice, I don't know about you, but whenever I watch a movie and I see that somebody is too good of a friend or too good of a mentor, or they're too old and they're too nice, I go, yep, that fucker's gonna die. I go, yeah, that guy's gonna die. I go, yeah, that fucker's gonna die. And then usually I'm right. Or if not, I'm very surprised, because I go, oh, I thought he would have died. Anyways, how is death handled in the world, right? So, are there any trends? Is there music? Is there fashion? Are there certain words that mean something? So, what are the different types of slang, right? So, in another piece of my work, American Hustle, the 88th Street Crew, not to be confused with the 88th Street Rollers, the actual gang, but in this case, the 88th Street Crew, led by R.J. Parker. So one of the slang that they use is hit 'em with the bass. Now, you would think, oh, hit 'em with the bass, like music, or hit 'em like whatever. No, it means like hit 'em with a really heavy weapon, like an RPG, an LMG, an M16 fully auto, or an M4 rifle. Hit 'em with the bass, because it's such a deep sounding weapon. And also because bass like shakes you, and because it's very heavy. Boom, 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 boom. So that's what they say when they say like hit 'em with the bass, hit 'em with that. So, you know, there's tons of different, there's totally different slang that they use for different things. I mean, if you look at Saints Row did the same thing. Like, they didn't call, I mean, yeah, they called guns weapons or whatever, and they did call guns, but usually they called them something like GATs, because in real street crime, guns they're usually called, like, a glizzy, or they're called, or like a nickname for a Glock, right? Or they're called a GAT, or they're called, my mini-me. Right? My weapon. Always walk around with my 9. That's my mini-me. My weapon. It's E40. Never mind. So anyways, is it possible to gain entry into your world easily? Right? Is there a certain amount of border protection that they have to do? Is there a certain amount of, is there a process, right? Is there, in the beginning of the video, I was talking about how there's the visa and the passport, right? So there's the brochure. What are the ways that you gain entry into the kingdom, into the region, into the mountains, into the estate, into the whatever, the country, whatever it may be, the planet, right? If you look at Star Wars, each planet has its own way of getting into the planet. So you rather have to show the Empire, reason for being there, right? Because it's border patrol, or you have to smuggle yourself in or sneak in, or if it's under rebel territory, you can just fly there. It's okay. So you have to think about, I mean, I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, but that's pretty much the gist. You have to think about is it possible to gain entry into your world, and what are the different things you can do? Again, feel free to take a screenshot of this, or feel free to write these questions down here and then apply them to your own work. This is just kind of what I'm telling you that these are, and how to think about them. But of course, it's ultimately up to you on how you decide to answer each of these questions. It's really up to you. You were the creator. You were the painter of the world. So there's that for you. So when we look at terminology and definitions, we have hard and soft world building, right? So those are essentially two extremes of a spectrum of storytelling styles that can be used to create immersive worlds in fiction, fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction, romance, action, thriller, murder, mystery, crime, whatever the genre you want to tell is. There's hard world building, which essentially is authors meticulously plan every deed grounded in logic and facts. Hard world building can give players tools to manipulate the world, create bigger worlds and systematic games. It also involves heavy descriptions of language and rules. And that's what I am. I am a hard world builder. But there's also the counterpart. There's the opposite, which is soft world building. And soft world building essentially is, and I want to pull up some notes here real quick. There we go. Excuse me. I'll pull up some notes. So essentially, soft world building, authors prefer to let their creativity flow more freely, letting more whimsical and mysterious for end results to happen. Soft world building can help tell a story, present the world as a metaphor, create small, intimate worlds that don't need much explaining. Think of kind of like your entry into D&D, those type of things. It can also help bring depth to a story without exposition or long descriptions. For example, soft world building can involve looser rules for magic, allowing readers to come up with their own interpretations without feeling overwhelmed. But a hard world builder would say, this is the way magic is, this is how it works, these are all the intricate details, and this is why it's important. So when I have some of my notes here, and I actually can use these on the next, I'll actually tell you after the next slide. So caveats. You can have extremely hard world building, but leave room for interpretation. You do not want to leave so much room for interpretation to where the player, the audience, the reader, the viewer, the watcher, whoever, where people can argue about the right way to perceive your world. However, you can have extremely soft world building and allow readers, viewers, or players to come up with their own ideas and understanding and beliefs about the world to get them into a deeper immersion, especially if people want to learn more about the details that will solve the mysteries left unexplained. This is very hard to do because you're kind of using soft world building as clues. You're using soft world building as I guess I don't want to say an interlude, but you're using it as a way to kind of entice the reader. Again, you're putting them in the pocket. And I said this last lecture, and I'll say it again here. There's a phrase in storytelling called like the pocket, or when you have the reader in the pocket. And essentially what that means is you now have them in a space where they're in a state of suspended disbelief, and you can allow them to really think about anything that they want in the world and really imagine it. But you want to use how they're imagining it, whatever you're talking about. Well, in this case, we're talking about worlds, so the world. And then what you want to do is you want to kind of use that as the guide, almost kind of like a GPS, to make it to where they then will go and understand deeper definitions of something. So essentially start out really light, and then the deeper you go into the story, the more hard world building you become. But it's a very nuanced thing to do, and it's very hard. That's why games like the Elder Scrolls, if you look at Skyrim, they say alchemy? Oh, you know alchemy, right? You just pop a giant's toe and a butterfly wing into your mouth, and you wash it down with some milk, and oh, look at that, you figured out how to make a health potion. Congrats. And it's like, yeah, that's soft world building. But what they do is, if you want to learn more about what each of the ingredients do, there's like alchemy books you can find scattered across the world, and you have to read those, and then you have to figure out how and why they work together. That would be the hard world building. So Skyrim, what it does is it gives you the soft world building of, oh, you know what alchemy is, right? You just throw stuff together and see what works. They're saying that for a game design's perspective because they want you to use the mechanic. They want you to use the alchemy mechanic. But in the story of Skyrim, really, alchemy is a really in-depth science. No one in their right mind would just throw like Nirnroot and Nightshade together and shake it in a bottle and drink it. You'd die. No one would do that. So, I mean, maybe somebody at one point did, and that's how it was discovered that you make poison. But the fact of the matter is, you want to use, if you're going to use soft world building and use the caveat to get them enticed into the world, you really want to allow them, and by them I mean the audience, you really want to allow the audience to use it as you kind of trick them into following their own footsteps, which leads them down into a more hard world building, and you can explain a more hard world building path, and you can explain to them what exactly it is that you're trying to say. Gotta love apple cider. So when we look at the Elder Scrolls, so I say the Elder Scroll, I meant to say the Elder Scrolls, I apologize. The Elder Scrolls do this, where one of the lead writers and creators for the series, Michael Kirkbride, he left cryptic notes for the player to find in-game that wouldn't make any sense because development changes over time until you go onto his unofficial/official Elder Scrolls blog, which is called the Imperial Library, where he gives much more context. He's no longer with the team, and he hasn't been since Oblivion, I believe. And it turns out the entire reality, the entire universe, the existence of everything in the Elder Scrolls is from the food, the friends, the enemies, the wars. It's all a dream of a sleeping god, where if one learns of this, they rather become a god themselves or erased from existence. This is called it's called achieving Kim, and I believe it's some zero. So you rather zero out, you're done, you're gone. I say zero out. That's a phrase that I created, but that's not the point. So rather you zero out, you're done, you're dead. You know, absolute, or you achieve absolute Kim, and then you become a god. And that's what people believe happened to the dwarves. The dwarves figured out what would happen if you concentrated a soul gem under certain parameters, and then you struck it with all of its energy charged at the core, and then what happens is essentially you become like a god, or you go bye-bye. Anyways, so this is what happened to the Dwemer, who were a type of elf, or, well, the dwarves of Skyrim, and they rather became absolute Kim, or they achieved absolute Kim, or they zero sum. That's what it was, zero sum, and then you nope out of existence. Zero out, I say. You'll probably hear me say that in later videos. Zero out is actually just like your HP depletes. You're done. You're gone. So, like, I use that for everything. Like, if I'm tired, I'll say, like, man, I'm ready to zero out. Or, like, if I lose, I'll be like, shit, I'm zeroed out. You know. Or if I get downed in Fortnite, I'll be like, fuck, zeroed out. Anyways. So, you know, you have to encourage players to go looking for more information and come to a theory that they later found was correct, that the dwarves achieved absolute Kim. And anyways, one of the many keys to a good story is how to balance what the recipient can and can't question. And that's something that you have to do. I can't teach you how to do that. That's something you have to do with practice. So that's something you'll have to do on your own. So I'm not going to go over this. This is just an activity for when I was lecturing at my college that I graduated from, and I printed this out for the students. And essentially, it's just like a world design lore table. So like how all video games fall into two categories: menus or parkour. And I kind of disagree with that, but I mean, that's kind of the general consensus on a very basic and rudimentary, almost archaic level of understanding. But because, I mean, there are games, I mean, what about, like, if a game is all about movement, just because there's menus? I mean, if you look at, like, Final Fantasy, that would be a menu game. If you look at, like, Assassin's Creed, that would be parkour. But, I mean, what about games like, I mean, GTA, Grand Theft Auto, I wouldn't really consider either a menu game or a parkour game. I mean, menu is like options and choosing, and then like parkour would be like Mario or Mirror's Edge. You know, I mean, there's regardless, it's just a basic foundation of like, is it movement based or is it menu based? And stories are kind of the same, right? You have your different genres. You have fantasy, crime, horror, adventure, mystery, science fiction, romance, slice of life, right? Oh, whoops, hold on, we don't want to get into that just yet. So we have all these different genres, and these are just a few that I picked off the top of my head. You can replace these with whatever you want. Then you have tone. You have light, you know, a very light-hearted tone, or you have something very dark. You could have dark and suspenseful, psychological, analog and physical. You could have linear, expansive, simple and complex, soft, hard, minimal, spicy, and cute. You could have mundane or exciting, or you could have comedic. And then you also, for style, you have realism or traditional. If you're doing like crime, you might have white-collar street crime. There's modern and vintage, fast and slow, noir, beat cop, average boy, average girl. There's data-focused and action-focused, angsty, comfort, work, homeschool. These are all just, and I go on to talk about the elements and the impact factor. I'll go over the impact factor. Essentially, immediate is whenever a character does something, there's an immediate consequence, or there's a consequence that happens sometime after. Then there's gradual, which means like the more that the character or the characters go along the story, the more they keep doing something, the impact becomes rather greater, or it will lead up to something. So a good example is another one of my works, Bureau. Special FBI agent Nathan Cooper, his very first job, his very first day on the job, he has to investigate the assassination of a senator in his office. Not Nathan's office, but the senator was killed in the senator's office. And immediate would be like if he is looking around and a sniper shot comes through the window and nearly kills him, right? That would be like immediate. But gradual would be like if he finds a note and it's like, Agent Cooper, stop looking into this, ... or else. The or else would be like the gradual, right? So you can really choose if you want something to be immediate or gradual, not graduate. If you're going to do that, I highly recommend learning to pace out your story. Now, I can tell you that I do both, but like, I shouldn't give away my secrets, but I'll do it anyway. So what I do is I use a pattern, and it's usually something happens gradually, then something immediate, then gradual, then something immediate, then gradual, then something immediate, or I'll do it in reverse. But of course, you can have either one or two, or you could have it lean more towards one and lean more towards the other. But anyways, what you would do is you would circle like what you want. So for example, I want a I want a fantasy adventure. Those are the two I would circle, a fantasy adventure, and it would have a dark tone, so it's a dark fantasy adventure world, right, or story rather, and it's very suspenseful, and I'm gonna say it's very physical. Analog, it just means like, because they're psychological, so think like Alan Wake or Max Payne, but more so Alan Wake. Analog would be more like, think like horror. Or like physical, like analog as in trying to, like Stranger Things is analog. So then there's physical. And then of course I'm going to say it's a linear story I'm going to say it's a expansive story. It's an expansive story. And I'm going to say that there's a lot of complexity in it, and I'm going to say that there's a lot of there's hard. I'm going to say the tone, it comes off very, very harsh. There's gonna be a lot of spicy sex scenes in here, okay? But I'll put it anyway. I'm just filling it out. And then and then the style would be like, we'll say it's traditional, so like it's in the real world, right? Instead of doing realism, we'll say, because it's fantasy, I probably would have to do realism instead of traditional, because then that means, no, I would do traditional, excuse me, because realism means it would be historically correct. So I would circle traditional. And then, I don't have to worry about white collar, or street crime, but I would do I wouldn't modern or vintage, it wouldn't matter because we know that's the medieval era. I'm going to say it has a very slow pacing. You get how you fill this out. So you could do this if you want, it's up to you, but it really is just a chart to get you to kind of have a guideline as to what your world is supposed to be. So on the dot, or almost on the dot, exactly within an hour, because I try to keep these to an hour, as close to an hour as I can, we will now move on to the secondary section, or the second section of our lecture, finally, which is, I didn't think I would actually complete this in like 3 videos, so we'll see, how fast we go through this, but so section 2.1, so we're finally starting on section 2 here. We're going to be talking about what everybody loves to talk about, character creation and world immersion, and it's going to be really fun, and it's going to be awesome because we're going to be talking about all the different things that go on here, and we're going to talk about how to capture it all in writing and talk about the different types of characters. So, and ooh, look at that. So, and I'll have a list here. It's going to be fun. So, I'll give you a little preview as to what we're talking about. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean a lot. If you did enjoy this lecture series and you did enjoy this lecture video, make sure that you give it a thumbs up. And if you are a creative writer, and perhaps you want to save this video for later, put it in your watch later, or if you know someone who is a creative writer that is struggling or wants to learn more about the in-depths of creative writing, then make sure to share this video as well. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them in the comments section below. And with that, I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching, everybody.